The chair wasn't just expensive. It was untouchable. A centerpiece of power positioned behind a desk that stretched 12 feet across, carved from a single piece of Italian walnut and polished to mirror shine. The chair itself was upholstered in Figlizzo leather, the same material used in Ferraris and private jets, stitched by hand in Turin and shipped across the Atlantic in a climate-controlled container. It cost more than most Americans earned in 2 years, more than Nya Carter would see in 5. Nya didn't know that when her legs finally gave out at 2:47 a.m. She didn't know about the provenance or the price tag or the unspoken rule that no one, sat in Victor Morrow's chair, not his vice presidents, not his board members, not the mayor of Chicago when he came begging for campaign contributions. All Nya knew was that the world had started tilting sideways and her knees had turned to water. 16 hours of cleaning, 3 jobs, one body pushed past its limits. Her shift at Morrison Services started at 11 p.m., after she'd already put in 8 hours at the diner on South Michigan Avenue and another 3 stocking shelves at the 24-hour pharmacy in Pilsen. Her hands burned from chemicals, the industrial-strength stuff they used on the marble floors of the Morrow Tower, the kind that ate through the cheap gloves they provided and left her skin raw and cracked. Her back screamed with every breath, vertebrae grinding together like stones, the result of years spent bent over mop buckets and scrub brushes, cleaning up after people who would never see her face. The executive floor, the 63rd floor, was always her last stop, always empty, always silent except for the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of Chicago traffic far below. She told herself she'd rest for 5 minutes. Just long enough to stop the room from spinning. Just long enough to catch her breath and quiet the violent pounding in her temples. Just long enough to remember why she was doing this. Her mother, Grace Carter, lying in a hospital bed at Northwestern Memorial, waiting for a surgery that insurance had denied 3 times, a surgery that would cost $140,000 they didn't have, a surgery that was the only thing standing between her and a slow, painful death. 5 minutes. That's all Nya needed. The Italian leather swallowed her whole the moment she sank into it. The chair was obscenely comfortable, contouring to her exhausted body like it had been built specifically for her, even though it had been built for a man who'd never known a day of real work in his privileged life. Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed. The pain in her back ebbed just enough for sleep to rush in like a tide. She never heard the elevator. She never heard the soft chime that announced its arrival on the 63rd floor, or the whisper of hydraulic doors sliding open, or the measured footsteps crossing the reception area's travertine floor. At 3:15 a.m., Victor Morrow stepped into his executive suite and froze. He'd come from a red-eye flight that landed at O'Hare at 2:30 a.m., a trip to Manhattan for negotiations that couldn't wait until morning, the kind of deal worth 9 figures, the kind that required his personal attention. He was tired but satisfied. The contract was signed. Another acquisition completed. Another competitor absorbed into the Morrow empire. But now, standing in his office doorway, every thought of business evaporated. A woman. Asleep. In his chair. She was small, maybe 5'3", wearing the gray Morrison Services uniform that hung loose on her thin frame. Her skin was deep brown, and even in sleep, her face held tension, the kind that never fully leaves people who work multiple jobs just to survive. Her name tag read N. Carter in utilitarian block letters. Her hands, resting in her lap, were covered in chemical burns. Victor's jaw tightened. Marcus Webb, the head of security for Morrow Tower, materialized from the hallway behind him, a former Chicago PD detective who traded his badge for triple the salary and none of the bureaucracy. Webb's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. "I'll remove her, sir." "No." Victor's voice was calm, controlled, dangerous in the way that only came from men who'd never had to raise their voices to get what they wanted. "Lock the doors." Webb hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough to wonder if he'd heard correctly, then complied. The electromagnetic locks engaged with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The office was now sealed. No one in, no one out, not until Victor Morrow decided otherwise. The lights snapped on, not the dim ambient lighting that stayed on all night, but the full overhead system, bright and clinical and merciless. Nya stirred. Victor moved behind his desk, never taking his eyes off her. He slid on a pair of black leather gloves, Dents of England, made from hair-sheep leather so soft they felt like a second skin, and reached into his desk drawer. Not for the panic button that would summon a team of security personnel, not for his phone to call the police. He pulled out a steel ruler. Not a weapon, something worse, a tool for measurement, judgment. It was exactly 12 inches long, precision machined from surgical-grade stainless steel, with laser-etched markings accurate to a 64th of an inch. Victor used it to measure everything in his life. The alignment of objects on his desk, the margins in contracts, the distance people maintained when they spoke to him. Order, control, precision. He tapped her arm with it. Once, twice. "Wake up." Nya's eyes flew open. Confusion first, the kind that comes from being ripped out of deep sleep, her mind scrambling to orient itself, to remember where she was and how she got there. Then recognition as her vision focused, and she saw the ceiling-high windows overlooking Chicago's nighttime skyline, the massive desk, the expensive art on the walls. Then terror. Pure, undiluted terror, as she saw the man standing over her like a verdict already passed. Victor Morrow was 42 years old, 6'1", with steel-gray eyes and dark hair touched with silver at the temples. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost $7,000 and a Swiss watch that cost 10 times that. Everything about him radiated power, from his perfect posture to the way he held silence like a weapon. "I'm sorry," Nya gasped, scrambling up so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet, the cleaning cart. She'd left the cleaning cart right outside the office, evidence of her presence, evidence of her violation. "I didn't mean to, I was just so tired and I thought." "You violated a restricted space," Victor said flatly, cutting through her stammering with surgical precision. "That's termination." The words hit like a physical blow. Her knees nearly buckled. "Please, I'll take any punishment, I just need this job." She needed all 3 jobs, the diner, the pharmacy, Morrison Services. Together they brought in $2,800 a month after taxes. Rent took $1,200, utilities $200, her mother's medication $600, food, transportation, the endless small expenses that added up. It all balanced on a knife's edge. Lose one job and the whole structure collapsed. Lose this job, and she'd be blacklisted from every cleaning service in Chicago. She'd done the math 100 times. She needed $4,300 more per month to save for her mother's surgery. At her current rate, accounting for every possible overtime shift and tip, it would take 14 years to save $140,000. Her mother didn't have 14 years. She didn't have 14 months. Victor slid a tablet across the desk. The screen glowed in the dim office, displaying a document with dense legal text. Nya's eyes darted across the words, but exhaustion and panic made them blur together. She caught fragments: non-disclosure agreement, incident acknowledgement, liability waiver, binding arbitration. "If you don't sign," Victor said, each word measured and deliberate, "this becomes a security breach. Morrison Services blacklists you. Every major building in this city follows suit." He wasn't threatening. He was explaining, stating facts with the emotional investment of someone reading a weather report. "You'll never clean another office in Chicago. Not at the Willis Tower. Not at the Aeon Center. Not anywhere that matters. And Morrison Services will ensure every company they contract with knows exactly why you were terminated. Nya thought of her mother. The hospital room on the 7th floor of Northwestern Memorial, with its antiseptic smell and machines that beep through the night. The surgeon, Dr. Patricia Morrison, no relation to the cleaning company, who'd explained the procedure 3 times, each explanation making it clearer that without it, Grace Carter would be dead within a year. The way her mother had held her hand and said, "Baby, don't sacrifice yourself for me," even though they both knew Nya would do exactly that. Her hands shook as she signed. The tablet registered her signature, a shaky, illegible scrawl that looked nothing like her normal handwriting. The document autofiled itself somewhere in the cloud, backed up on servers in 3 different states, legally binding and unbreakable. Victor watched closely, studying her face with the intensity of a biologist examining a specimen under a microscope. Then he surprised her. "You'll continue cleaning my floors," he said. "Personally." Hope flickered in Nya's chest, a small, fragile thing like a candle in a storm. Then he crushed it. "This isn't a reward," Victor continued, his tone unchanged, explaining the terms of her sentence with clinical detachment. "It's supervision." He explained the new arrangement with the same precision he applied to everything else in his life. She would report to the 63rd floor at midnight every night. Not 11:59, not 12:01, midnight exactly. She would clean only the executive suite, his office, the conference room, the private bathroom, the kitchenette. No one else would be assigned to this floor. No one else would witness what happened here. "You'll follow protocols I'll provide," Victor said. "Deviation results in immediate termination. Questions?" Nya had 1,000 questions. Why was he doing this? What did he gain from keeping her under his thumb? Was this punishment or something else entirely? But she only asked one, "When do I start?" "Tomorrow night," Victor said. "Midnight, don't be late." Marcus Webb unlocked the doors, and Nya fled. She spent the next day in a fog of exhaustion and dread. Her shift at the diner was a disaster. She dropped a tray of dishes, forgot 2 orders, and snapped at a regular customer who complained his coffee wasn't hot enough. Her manager, a kind woman named Rosa who'd been covering for Nya's mistakes for months, pulled her aside. "Mija, what's going on with you?" "Nothing," Nya lied, "just tired." "You're always tired," Rosa said gently, "but this is different. Is it your mama?" Nya's throat tightened. "She's the same. The surgery fund is at $8,300, only $131,700 to go." The number was so absurd she almost laughed. Almost. Rosa squeezed her shoulder. "You can't pour from an empty cup, baby. You're going to collapse." "I'll rest when she's better," Nya said, and went back to work. At 11:45 p.m., she stood outside the Morrow Tower in the Chicago cold, staring up at the building that pierced the night sky like a shard of glass. 63 floors up, lights burned in Victor Morrow's office. He was waiting. She took the elevator up, her reflection staring back at her from the polished brass doors. A woman who looked 10 years older than her 26 years, with dark circles under her eyes and chemical burns on her hands. The doors opened at midnight exactly. Victor stood in the reception area, holding a leather binder. "You're on time," he said, as if this surprised him. "Good." He opened the binder and Nya's heart sank. Inside were checklists, dozens of them, each one detailed down to absurd specificity. The desk surface cleaned in overlapping figure-8 patterns. Windows washed from top to bottom, left to right, with a squeegee angled at precisely 45 degrees. The coffee station restocked with specific brands in specific locations. Lavaza Super Crema beans in the grinder, Fiji water in the refrigerator, Domino pure cane sugar. Never the packets, always the bowl, positioned exactly 3 inches from the espresso machine. Cameras monitor compliance, Victor said, gesturing to the small black domes in every corner. I review footage nightly. Mistakes are documented. How many mistakes before termination? Nya asked. 3. 3 strikes, 3 chances to fail, 3 opportunities to lose everything. Victor handed her the binder. Begin. That first night lasted 5 hours. Every task took twice as long as it should have because Nya kept double-checking, triple-checking, measuring with a tape measure she'd bought at the hardware store to ensure every object was positioned exactly where Victor demanded. Her hands cramped. Her back ached. The silence pressed into her skull like a vice. Victor worked at his desk the entire time, his presence filling the room like electricity in the air before a storm. He never spoke to her, never looked up from his laptop, but she felt his attention on her constantly, waiting for her to fail. She didn't fail. Not that night. At 5:00 a.m., Victor reviewed her work. He walked through the office with that steel ruler, measuring distances, checking angles, running his gloved finger along surfaces to test for dust. Finally he nodded, acceptable. It wasn't praise. It was barely acknowledgement, but Nya felt a surge of relief so powerful her knees went weak. Same time tomorrow, Victor said. She stumbled to the elevator, exhausted beyond measure, and rode down 63 floors to a city just beginning to wake up. Starting the next night, everything changed. For weeks, Nya worked under cameras that never blinked. Victor had installed additional surveillance equipment, discreet but comprehensive. Every corner of the executive floor was covered, every movement tracked, every second documented. The footage was stored on secure servers, backed up in real time, accessible only to Victor and his head of security. Sometimes, in the middle of her shift, she'd catch Victor watching playback on his laptop, reviewing her work from previous nights, looking for patterns, analyzing her efficiency like she was a machine to be optimized rather than a person trying to survive. The checklists multiplied. By the second week, the leather binder had grown to 47 pages. Each page outlined protocols for different areas, different tasks, different standards of perfection. The windows had to be cleaned with a specific solution, 1 part white vinegar to 4 parts distilled water, never tap water because it left mineral deposits, and dried with lint-free microfiber cloths that had to be folded in quarters, never thirds, never halves. The hardwood floors in the conference room required a different approach than the marble in the main office. The leather furniture had its own cleaning regimen involving pH-balanced solutions and conditioning treatments. Even the trash cans had specifications. Liners changed daily, positioned with the seam facing the wall, bags tied with a specific knot that Victor had diagrammed on page 32. Silence so heavy it pressed into her chest. Victor was often there, working late into the night, his presence filling the office like a storm system. The soft click of his keyboard, the rustle of papers, the occasional phone call conducted in low tones, discussing mergers and acquisitions worth more money than Nya could comprehend. He never spoke to her beyond correcting mistakes. Never acknowledged her as a person, only as a function to be optimized. The desk alignment is off by half an inch, he'd say without looking up. The water temperature is too hot. You'll damage the finish on the wood. That's the 3rd time this week you've positioned the stapler incorrectly. Each correction was delivered in the same flat tone, devoid of emotion, as if he were reading from a technical manual. Never cruel but never kind, just efficient. One mistake meant termination. Termination meant her mother dying. The pressure was suffocating. Nya stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. She'd finish her shift at the Morrow Tower at 5:00 a.m., take the red line back to her apartment in Inglewood, shower off the night's exhaustion, and report to the diner by 7:30 a.m. 8 hours on her feet, serving breakfast and lunch to the rush of commuters and business people who never looked her in the eye. Then the pharmacy from 4:00 p.m. to 7:00 p.m., stocking shelves and running the register, before heading back to the Morrow Tower to start the cycle again. Her hands developed tremors from stress and exhaustion, small at first, barely noticeable when she held a coffee pot or counted out change. But they grew worse each day, making the precision work Victor demanded increasingly difficult. She started drinking energy drinks to keep alert, then graduated to caffeine pills when the drinks stopped working. She lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. Her uniform hung looser. Her face grew gaunt. The other cleaners at Morrison Services whispered about her when she came to pick up supplies from the warehouse on South Ashland Avenue. Some whispered with pity, "Poor girl's working herself to death." Others with resentment, "Why does she get special treatment? We all got bills to pay." A few with suspicion, "What's really going on up there on the 63rd floor? No one else is allowed on that level. What's he making her do?" Nya heard the whispers but didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The NDA she'd signed covered everything that happened in Victor Morrow's office. Even acknowledging the whispers would be a violation. But she didn't break. She couldn't afford to. On a Tuesday night in late September, during her 3rd week of supervised cleaning, Nya made her first mistake. It was small, meaningless, even. The kind of error anyone might make after working 20-hour days for weeks on end. She placed Victor's ergonomic keyboard 3/4 of an inch too far to the left of center on his desk. Victor noticed immediately. He stood from his chair, walked around the desk, and measured with his ruler. The steel gleamed under the office lights as he held it against the keyboard's edge. "Mistake number 1, he said calmly. "Documented." Nya's heart hammered in her chest. "I'm sorry, I'll fix it right now." "No," Victor returned to his chair. "The mistake is logged. Correcting it doesn't erase it. You have 2 remaining. 2 chances left. 2 more mistakes before she lost everything." That night, Nya cried on the red line heading home, tears streaming silently down her face while other passengers carefully avoided looking at her. Nobody wanted to acknowledge another person's suffering on public transit. It was easier to stare at phones, at advertisements, at anything except the woman falling apart 3 seats away. The second mistake came 4 days later. She used the wrong cleaning solution on the conference room table, grabbed the wood polish instead of the leather conditioner in a moment of exhaustion-induced confusion. Victor caught it before any damage was done, but the violation was clear. "Mistake number 2, he said, 1 remaining." Nya felt the walls closing in. 1 mistake, 1 failure, 1 moment of human error between her and catastrophe. She started double-checking everything obsessively, triple-checking, quadruple-checking. Each task took longer, eating into the limited time she had, making her rush through the final items on the checklist, which increased the likelihood of mistakes, which made her more anxious, which made her slower. A vicious cycle with no exit. She stopped eating properly. Food seemed irrelevant, an unnecessary distraction from the work that consumed her existence. She survived on whatever she could grab between shifts: stale donuts from the diner, energy bars from the pharmacy, black coffee that burned her stomach but kept her awake. Rosa at the diner finally cornered her in the kitchen during a slow afternoon. "Mija, you need to see a doctor." "I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're shaking. You can barely hold a coffee pot without spilling. And you look," Rosa paused, choosing words carefully, "you look like you're dying." "I can't afford a doctor," Nya said flatly. "The clinic on Roosevelt does sliding scale." "I can't afford time off work either. My mom needs—" "I know what your mama needs," Rosa interrupted gently. "But she needs you alive, baby. You're no good to her dead." Nya wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because Rosa was right. She was destroying herself. Piece by piece, night by night, mistake by mistake. But what choice did she have? Stop working, watch her mother die. Keep working, die herself. There were no good options, only different flavors of catastrophe. That night at the Morrow Tower, Nya worked with shaking hands and blurred vision. The caffeine pills had stopped helping. Now they just made her jittery and nauseous, adding stomach cramps to the symphony of pain her body had become. Victor was at his desk, as always, working through a stack of contracts that needed his signature. The scratch of his fountain pen, a Montblanc Meisterstück that cost $1,200, was the only sound besides the hum of the HVAC system. Nya finished the windows, checked the alignment, measured the distances. Everything perfect, everything exactly as the checklists demanded. She moved to the coffee station, restocked the supplies, positioned everything with mathematical precision. Then she reached for the espresso machine to wipe down its exterior, and the world tilted. Her vision tunneled, the floor rushed up. She caught herself on the counter, knuckles white, breathing hard. Victor looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in 3 weeks. "Are you ill?" he asked, the question devoid of concern, purely informational. "No," Nya lied, "just tired." Unacceptable. Fatigue leads to mistakes. He returned his attention to his contracts. "Complete your tasks." Nya straightened, forced her legs to cooperate, and finished the checklist. At 5:00 a.m., Victor conducted his inspection. He found no errors, no mistakes, no violations. "Acceptable," he said. Nya nodded and turned toward the elevator, each step requiring conscious effort, her body moving on autopilot through sheer force of will. "Carter." She froze. Victor never used her name, never acknowledged her as anything beyond a function. "You're maintaining standards despite obvious physical deterioration," he said, still not looking at her, organizing the contracts into neat stacks. "That demonstrates discipline." It wasn't praise, it wasn't kindness. It was observation, clinical and detached. But Nya felt something stir in her chest anyway. Not hope, she'd learned hope was dangerous, but something smaller. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that she existed, even as a data point in Victor Morrow's endless calculations. "Thank you," she whispered and left. She didn't know that the next night would change everything. She couldn't have known that Victor Morrow, for all his preparation and control, was about to lose control in the most fundamental way possible. Then one night Victor collapsed. It was 1:37 a.m. on a Thursday in late September. The night had started like all the others. Nya arrived at midnight exactly, collected the leather binder from Victor's desk, and began working through the checklists with mechanical precision. Victor was at his usual position, reviewing quarterly reports from his holdings in real estate, technology, and manufacturing. The empire he'd built through ruthless efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to identify market opportunities before anyone else saw them coming. Nya was cleaning the windows on the north side of the office, her back to the desk, using the squeegee at the prescribed 45-degree angle when she heard a sound. Something between a gasp and a groan, barely audible over the white noise of the city below. She turned. Victor was on his knees beside his desk, one hand pressed to his chest, the other reaching for something. His phone, maybe, or the desk drawer where he kept medication. His face had gone gray, the color of old concrete, a sheen of sweat across his forehead catching the light. His breathing came in shallow, rapid bursts. Chest pain, shallow breathing. Pills scattered across marble that cost more than Nya's entire apartment building. Tiny white tablets rolling across the polished stone, bisoprolol fumarate, the beta blocker his cardiologist had prescribed after the incident 2 years ago. A myocardial infarction during a board meeting that his publicist had successfully kept out of the press. The incident that had hospitalized him for a week and should have slowed him down but didn't, because Victor Morrow didn't slow down for anything, not even his own mortality. Nya froze. The security cameras blinked red in the corners of the room, recording everything, watching everything, seeing her see him. Digital eyes that never closed, that would document whatever choice she made next, that would provide evidence for whatever legal consequences followed. Her mind raced through the contract she'd signed, the dense legal text that had blurred together in her exhaustion and panic, but whose implications were crystal clear. Section 7, subsection C. Employee acknowledges that any emergency response initiated without explicit authorization from Morrow Enterprises constitutes a breach of confidentiality regarding the physical location and condition of company principals. The legal language was deliberately vague, crafted by attorneys who specialized in protecting billionaires from liability, but the message was clear. Victor Morrow's privacy was more important than anything else. Even his life. Calling for help would violate the contract, would expose her to lawsuits she couldn't afford, legal action that would bankrupt her, destroy any chance of saving her mother. The NDA she'd signed gave Morrow Enterprises the right to pursue damages up to $1 million for breach of confidentiality, a number so absurd it was almost laughable, except it wasn't a joke. It was a cage. Walking away would keep her mother alive, would preserve her job, her income, her carefully balanced budget that barely kept them afloat, would mean she could continue the impossible math of saving for a surgery that seemed further away with each passing day. She could finish her shift, complete the checklists, leave at 5:00 a.m. as scheduled. In 5 or 6 hours, someone else would find him. Security would do their rounds. Maybe he'd survive until then. Maybe he wouldn't, but it wouldn't be her responsibility, wouldn't be her fault, wouldn't be her choice. All she had to do was turn around, keep cleaning, pretend she'd never heard him fall. Victor's hand scraped across the marble, reaching for pills that had rolled too far away. His breathing grew more labored. Each gasp sounded like it might be his last. Nya thought of her mother. Grace Carter, lying in that hospital bed, her body failing by degrees while insurance companies found new reasons to deny coverage for the surgery that could save her. Grace, who'd worked 3 jobs herself to raise Nya alone after her father died in a construction accident when Nya was 7. Grace, who'd never complained, never given up, never stopped fighting for her daughter's future. What would Grace say if she knew Nya had let a man die to save her? What would Grace want her to do? Nya's hands shook as she knelt beside Victor anyway. "Mr. Morrow," she said, her voice trembling, "can you hear me?" He managed a slight nod, his eyes focusing on her with difficulty. Up close, she could see the fear in them, the same fear she saw in her mother's eyes when the doctors delivered bad news, the universal human fear of death, which apparently didn't discriminate between billionaires and janitors. "Your pills," Nya said. "Which ones do you need?" Victor's hand moved weakly toward a specific scattered tablet. The bisoprolol. Nya gathered several of them, along with a bottle of water from his mini fridge. Fiji, naturally, not the tap water that was apparently good enough for everyone else. She helped him take the medication, supporting his head, feeling the weight of potential legal consequences pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Every second she stayed, every action she took, was another violation of the contract, another brick in the lawsuit that could destroy her. But she stayed. "I'm calling an ambulance," she said, reaching for his phone. "No," the word came out barely above a whisper, but it was firm, definitive. "You need a hospital." No ambulances, no hospitals, no publicity. Victor's breathing stabilized slightly as the medication began working. "Call, Web, Security, extension 7000. You could die." "That's my choice." His gray eyes fixed on her with sudden intensity. "Make the call." Nya's hand shook as she dialed. Marcus Webb answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Security never slept in a building like this. 63rd floor, Nya said. It's Mr. Morrow. Something's wrong. He needs help. Webb arrived in under 3 minutes, emergency medical kit in hand. Behind him came Dr. Sarah Chen, a private physician kept on retainer specifically for situations like this, situations that required discretion more than they required hospital protocols. Dr. Chen knelt beside Victor, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency while asking rapid-fire questions about his symptoms, his medications, his recent stress levels. She pulled out equipment Nya didn't recognize, running tests that seemed more sophisticated than what most emergency rooms could provide. Marcus Webb pulled Nya aside. What happened? I heard him fall, found him like this. You called for help. Webb's expression was unreadable. That violated the NDA. He was dying. That's not your determination to make. Nya felt ice flood her veins, so I should have let him die. I'm saying there are protocols, procedures, legal frameworks. Webb paused, but you did the right thing, morally if not legally. It was the closest thing to reassurance she was going to get. Dr. Chen worked for 20 minutes, administering medications, monitoring Victor's heart rhythm, consulting via video call with a cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial who was presumably also sworn to confidentiality. Finally, Victor's color improved. His breathing normalized. The immediate crisis passed. Stress-induced arrhythmia, Dr. Chen announced, compounded by irregular medication compliance and approximately 3 hours of sleep per night for the last 2 weeks. She looked at Victor sternly. You're not invincible, Mr. Morrow. Your body has limits. I'm aware, Victor said dryly, managing to sound imperious even from the floor. Dr. Chen helped him into his chair, the untouchable throne that had started this entire cascade of events. She prescribed rest, reduced stress, regular meals, and a follow-up appointment that Victor would probably ignore. Then she left, taking her equipment and her discretion with her. Webb lingered by the door. I'll file an incident report, sanitized version. Thank you, Marcus. Webb nodded and departed, leaving Nya alone with Victor Morrow. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. The cameras were still recording. The evidence of her contract violation was documented in multiple formats, stored on secure servers, ready to be weaponized if Victor chose. Victor looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd signed that tablet in panic and desperation. You could have walked away, he said finally. I know. You should have walked away, legally speaking. I know that too. Why didn't you? Nya thought about how to answer that. Thought about her mother, about the values Grace had instilled in her, about the difference between what was legal and what was right. Because you're a human being, she said simply, and I'm not the kind of person who lets people die just to protect myself. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Not quite warmth, but perhaps the beginning of recognition that the woman standing before him was more than just a function to be optimized, a variable in his endless equations of efficiency and control. The contract violation, Victor said slowly, I could destroy you with it. I know, but I won't. Nya felt her knees weaken with relief, so powerful it was almost painful. The supervision arrangement is terminated, Victor continued. Effective immediately. You'll return to regular Morrison services rotation. Different buildings, different shifts. The checklists, the cameras, the documentation, all of it ends tonight. Thank you, Nya whispered. However, Victor pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I'm wiring $150,000 to an account in your name. It should arrive within the hour. Use it for whatever you need. Nya's mind went blank. I don't understand. Your mother's surgery, the one you're slowly killing yourself to pay for. Victor's expression remained neutral, but something in his voice had changed. I reviewed your employment records, your schedule. The financial stress was obvious to anyone paying attention. How did you? I pay attention, Victor said simply. It's what I do. Nya felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Weeks of stress and fear and exhaustion poured out in a flood she couldn't control. Victor looked uncomfortable, uncertain how to respond to this display of raw emotion. I'll need a receipt, he said awkwardly, for tax purposes. This is technically a medical hardship grant distributed through the Morrow Foundation's Emergency Assistance Program. Nya laughed through her tears. Of course. Even in generosity, Victor Morrow needed structure, documentation, legal frameworks. Thank you, she managed. Thank you so much. You saved my life, Victor said quietly. This is equitable. But they both knew it was more than that. Nya Carter took the elevator down from the 63rd floor at 3:47 a.m. 10 minutes after Victor Morrow had nearly died, carrying in her phone the confirmation of a wire transfer that would save her mother's life. The Chicago sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, that pre-dawn glow that promised a new day. She walked to the Red Line station, her body exhausted but her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had 2 more shifts at the diner today, a closing shift at the pharmacy tonight. Tomorrow she'd work at 3 different office buildings for Morrison Services, cleaning up after people who would never see her face. But her mother would live. And Nya had learned something about the man in the untouchable chair. Underneath all that control and precision and carefully maintained distance, Victor Morrow was just as human as the rest of them. Just as capable of falling. And just as capable, perhaps, of being saved. Be honest. Should Nya have helped him? Or protected her mother and walked away? There was no right choice. Which one would you make? He had power, money, and protection. She had nothing but her body and her conscience. Why is the poor person always expected to be the good one? Part 2 goes deeper. Subscribe if you want the fallout.